you know, in that older man kind of a way. I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Imagine. Gives me chills.
สำหรับฉันหนึ่งในอนุสาวรีย์ที่น่าสนใจที่สุดก็คืออนุสาวรีย์แฟรงคลิน ดีรูสเวลต์ผู้ซึ่งนำอเมริกาผ่านพ้นยุคแห่งความตกต่ำและสงครามโลกครั้งที่2ไปได้เขาเป็นหนึ่งในประธานาธิบดีที่ยิ่งใหญ่ที่สุดของสหรัฐอเมริกาไม่มีใครเคยรู้ว่าเขาพิการจากโรคโปลิโอและต้องนั่งรถเข็นวันนี้ความจริงได้ถูกนำมาเปิดเผยแล้วที่พิพิธภัณฑ์แห่งนี้พร้อมด้วยรถเข็นค่ะ
This is the Lincoln Memorial. It's crawling with tourists, and it's like this day and night. But there's a reason why this memorial is so popular, and I'll tell you why when I get to the top. Let me catch my breath. Then I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you why this is one of the most popular sites in Washington, D.C. Number one, this incredible statue of Abraham Lincoln. Number two, it's Abraham Lincoln. Honest Abe, as he was called, presided over one of the most tumultuous periods of history in this country, Civil War. He's credited with abolishing slavery and saving the Union. I wouldn't say that he's better looking than Jefferson, more fatherly looking. It's a very sexy stare. He's got very big hands. The other reason so many people want to come here is because they want to stand right here on this spot. Because it was right here back in 1963 that a man stood before an audience of 200,000 people and he said to them, "I have a dream." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the great civil rights leader, President Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator. I wonder what these two guys would think about the world today. This is the Korean War Memorial. It's really striking because it's so human. There are 19 heavily armed combat soldiers advancing across an open field, and each one of them is looking in a different direction. They don't know what's ahead of them. They don't know what's behind them. You can really see the fear on their faces. Very powerful.
เดินจากอนุสาวรีย์เกาหลีไปไม่กี่นาทีจะเจออนุสาวรีย์สงครามอีกแห่งหนึ่งมันมีความเรียบง่ายมากอนุสาวรีย์สงครามเวียดนาม
Well, this is definitely the most moving memorial that I've come across in Washington, D.C. The name of every single American soldier who died or went missing is engraved in these walls. 58,191 names. It really takes your breath away. And you can see, I mean, there are just so many people coming through here. This is one of the most visited sites in all of the United States, and it's the most famous memorial. You can see why. Are you looking for a particular name?
We have it.
Who is that?
Mike Hope.
Mike Hope.
Yeah. He's one of our classmates, and we all of us went to officer school together in the Army. And we have a reunion this weekend, and this is the first time we've all been here.
You're here too.
Were you in Vietnam?
Yeah, we all
of them were. You were all at Vietnam?
Yeah. He was one of our classmates.
And is this the first time you've seen the memorial?
It is for me. This is my second time.
What? Do you feel like this memorial does justice to your colleagues?
no memorial can do justice to what they did. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. วันนี้เป็นวันสบายๆของฉันห่างจากดีซีไปแค่20 ไมล์เป็นบ้านของคนที่พูดตรงๆก็คือใส่กรุงวอชิงตันลงบนแผนที่ค่ะ
This is George Washington's house. He was the first president of the United States. The house is called Mount Vernon, even though there ain't no mountain anywhere around here. It's one of those fancy names. It was in this room that George Washington found out that he had been elected unanimously by the Continental Congress to be the first president of the United States. And it says that right over there by those windows is where he laid in state for 3 days following his death in 1799. Important room. Imagine the hands that touched this banister. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Justine Shapiro. This is the General and Mrs. Washington's bedchamber. She had that bed custom made for her husband because he was so tall. It's 6 feet wide and 6.5 feet long. She was barely 5 feet. I guess she didn't want his feet hanging over the edge at night and getting cold. So sweet. And they married when he was 27. They were married for 40 years until he died in this bed when he was 67. I was old back then. I think she took good care of him. I think they must have had a happy marriage. This was George Washington's private study, his personal space. He'd come down here early in the morning. He said he didn't like the sun to find him in bed. And he'd shave down here, he'd dress down here, he'd let Martha sleep in a little bit. And he read all these books. It's estimated that George Washington read over 1,000 books in his lifetime. They're not just there for show off. He wrote over 40,000 letters. And this room kind of gives you a sense of why it was George Washington who was elected to be the first president of the United States. And he wasn't just a man of action. You know, he fought wars, he explored the wilderness, he farmed his land, but really he was a man of ideas. He took from what he read and applied what he thought best to creating a new country. Whenever I look at a portrait of George Washington, I see a man who looks passive, pensive, kind of pacey, and I think, what is it about him that made him the first president of the United States? But today I think I kind of get it. He was an incredibly ambitious, driven, energetic man. He was a great general, a leader, a mediator, imposing at 6'3", a strong horseman, well-built, and most of all, he was a real visionary. There were over 300 slaves working on the Mount Vernon estate, and about 50 of them are buried right here in unmarked graves. The rest of them are buried in other locations around the land, in unmarked graves, of course. Here lies the first president of the United States and his wife Martha, who died 2 years after he did. It's easy to get around Washington, D.C. because the metro will take you to just about anywhere you want to go. Besides that, it's fast, it's cheap, and it's clean. After the Civil War, D.C. became a black town. Despite the fact that they were in the majority, blacks suffered segregation and were forced to live in certain neighborhoods, like this one, along U Street. But because they had to be self-sufficient, blacks created a vibrant intellectual and professional middle class. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, and some of the world's greatest musicians came from these neighborhoods and performed here. In the 20s and the 30s, there was so much jazz and blues happening up and down U Street that it was lovingly referred to as Black Broadway. The Lincoln Theater, legendary. The biggest blues